They said the forest doesn't take people, it remembers them. But tonight, the ground itself is whispering their names back through the soil. You can still hear them if you listen long enough. Tonight, Dreadscribe writes again. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. And if there's a story you'd like me to cover next, I'd love to hear it too. The first thing that hit me when I reached the old watchtower was the sound. Not wind, not birds, but a hollow resonance that seemed to pulse through the trees. Yellowstone's forests are never truly silent, yet that morning they felt staged, like nature was holding its breath. I'd come chasing a ghost story, a ranger named Miller who vanished 23 years ago after reporting strange lights above Pelican Valley. The tower was his last post, a lonely structure standing like a cracked tooth against the gray sky. Inside, the air was dense with the smell of dust and pine resin. The floorboards creaked under my boots, the sound echoing far too loud for such a small space. Miller's logbook sat open on the desk, pages stiff with age and moisture. His last entry was a single line written in trembling ink. "The forest knows I'm here." I remember tracing the words with my glove, wondering if loneliness could bend a man's mind until the trees themselves started talking back. But when the floor beneath me seemed to hum, a low vibration like a generator deep underground, I began to question which of us was listening. They say certain frequencies, below human hearing, can induce dread, confusion, even hallucinations. Infrasound. I'd read about it on the drive up, how wind tunnels between cliffs can form natural speakers. Scientists think it's why people feel watched in empty spaces, but there's a difference between theory and sensation. My ribs began to buzz faintly, as if something alive inside the forest was purring. Each pulse felt like a question I couldn't answer. By dusk, mist started to creep in, thick and silver, swallowing the valley below. I climbed to the top deck to record audio samples, my breath leaving thin trails in the cold. The horizon blinked with faint lights, not steady like stars, but erratic, pulsing in rhythm. For a moment I thought of lightning bugs until one flare hung too long, hovering just above the tree line. My recorder picked up a distortion, faint static, almost like words buried under the noise. When I amplified it through my headset, a whisper threaded through. "Miller." At first I thought it was playback contamination, maybe a ranger's voice from archived channels. But the whisper came again, slower, drawn out like it was tasting the name. My pulse quickened, though a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't just that it said his name. It was how it lingered after, waiting, as if for an answer. I told myself it was the mind's way of seeking patterns in chaos. Humans anthropomorphize sound all the time. We name echoes. We invent ghosts. Yet when I whispered, "Who's there?" into the static, the fog below shifted, forming what looked like a figure, tall, still, and facing the tower. The lights flickered once, then again. The hum beneath the floor deepened, steady, rhythmic, like breathing from beneath the soil. And for the first time since arriving, I realized I wasn't just investigating Miller's disappearance. I was stepping into its continuation. The fog held at the tree line as if the forest had drawn a chalk mark and dared me to cross it. I descended the tower, each rung a metronome for the low throb underfoot. The hum sat inside my ribs, a cello string tuned to the ache of my name. I told myself I followed evidence, but truth walked beside me like a shadow. I was following a story. At the base I found prints, not boot treads, smooth ovals, careful as someone tiptoeing through a sleeping house. They drifted into spruces where mist braided into pale ropes. My beam combed bark slick with lichen. Droplets on needles flashed like mirrors. When the recorder sizzled, I lifted the headphones. The whisper came clean. "Miller." Then, softer, it formed the first sound of my own name. I answered his in full, a ritual against panic. A limb cracked, too deliberate for wind. The lights beyond the trees rose and fell like lungs. This was the hinge where investigation becomes confession. I wasn't here to debunk. I was here to be changed. But by what? The spruces opened to a meadow stitched with old game trails. At its center leaned a ruined signpost, letters weathered to a ghost alphabet. A short chain hung from the crossbar, and on it swung a tarnished badge. Before my beam steadied, I knew the shape. 5 points, one bent, a sunburst etched like frost. When the light held, a name surfaced. Miller. Shallow, as if the letters didn't want to cut the night. I reached, and the badge stopped mid-sway, as if an unseen hand had steadied it. The hum deepened until my teeth vibrated. I ran the rational script. Low frequency disturbs balance, seeds voices and wind. But another thought pressed in. What if the landscape wasn't tricking us, but speaking? What if the park invited Miller the way a tide invites a shore? The fog brightened from within, air purling like breath on glass. Then I saw him. A figure stood where mist touched ground. Edges blurred the way heat blurs asphalt. Above the breast pocket, a small star, his badge catching my light. He lifted one hand, palm out. Not warning, recognition. The whisper multiplied into hollow trunks, not hostile or kind, merely aware. For a heartbeat, I felt less hunted than accounted for. Then my radio spoke. It crackled without my touch. Syllables unspooling from static. Tower. Log. Last page. The hand lowered. The fog drew him back like a curtain settling. The meadow emptied, leaving only the badge on its tether, spinning once and facing me. I climbed fast, breath burning. The logbook still lay open. Beneath the last line, "The forest knows I'm here," another sentence had risen in faint graphite, as if written from the far side of paper. Names belong to the ones who can hear them. Below it, my name began, a single letter trailing like a fuse. I did not finish it. I closed the book and listened. The hum softened to an animal's breath. Outside, dawn unstitched mist, and every tree stood where it had been. Some people don't leave the forest because the leaving part dissolves first. In light, I understood the wilderness keeps what echoes. I walked stairs carrying the frequency after the sound was gone. The first time I heard the glacier speak, it was through my headphones, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Yosemite's Glacier Point has a silence that feels sacred, as though the world pauses mid-breath just to listen. I was there for a climate study, collecting subglacial recordings to analyze microfractures. But when I pressed play that night, what came through wasn't cracking ice. It was a rhythm, human, deliberate, and heartbreakingly familiar. It sounded like someone whispering from under the world. The tape began with wind, then low vibrations at 18 hertz. Infrasound, beneath the range of human hearing. I'd read about it in research journals. Sound waves that could stir emotion without words. Fear, unease, dread. Scientists theorized it explained haunted places. How architecture, cliffs or tunnels could resonate at frequencies that make people feel watched. But this wasn't theory anymore. I felt that frequency crawling through my sternum like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps tectonic movement, maybe air channels echoing through melting cavities. Still, the voice came again, clearer. It wasn't English, more like syllables pressed through water, vowels stretched thin. The audio spectrogram mapped it as a repeating pattern every 12 seconds, as though someone or something was speaking in measured intervals. I played the file back in the field tent, the glow from my laptop painting the ice in dim blue. My research partner Ellis leaned close. "It's probably an artifact," he said, but his voice trembled. Artifacts don't mimic speech. They don't pause mid-sentence like they're thinking. When the whisper came again, Ellis flinched. Then his eyes widened. "Did you hear that? It said your name." I froze. On the recording, the words stretched through static. Soft, deliberate. My name spoken with breath that wasn't air. I replayed it, convinced it was pareidolia, the brain's habit of finding meaning in noise. But when I slowed the frequency down, it wasn't random. The syllables matched speech cadence. The voice wasn't calling to me. It was repeating me. I increased the mic sensitivity and pressed record again. The glacier answered before I could ask. A second hum layered over the first, higher, pulsing in rhythm with my breathing. The sound waves mirrored my own inhalations, as though the ice was sinking, learning. Alice stepped back, muttering something about resonance feedback. But the fear in his eyes betrayed a different thought, that the glacier wasn't reflecting us. It was remembering us. That night, the temperature dropped below freezing. The tent walls flexed like lungs, wind straining against the seams. I dreamt of tunnels glowing with trapped light, of voices traveling through frozen arteries older than time. When I woke, the recorder was still running. Only now the whisper was louder, clearer, like it had moved closer to the microphone. It wasn't calling my name anymore. By dawn, the valley had turned glassy with frost, every rock rimmed in pale fire. I stepped out to find Ellis gone. No footprints, no gear, just a ripple of disturbed snow leading toward the ice wall. The recorder was still humming, replaying my voice in fragments. "We shouldn't go," stitched between static like a message half erased by wind. I followed the trail until it ended at a fissure, a narrow mouth in the glacier, breathing mist into the morning air. The hum grew louder there, a subterranean choir vibrating against my ribs. Inside the crevasse, light thinned to a strange luminescence, as though the ice was backlit by trapped storms. The deeper I went, the more rhythmic the sound became. Not random at all, but musical. It had structure, timing, a pulse that matched the data intervals from last night's recording. My breath fogged in the beam of my headlamp, and for a moment I could see my exhalation turn solid, crystallizing midair before drifting into the walls. The glacier was exhaling me back. At 20 meters deep, I found the source, a vein of air pockets sealed in ice, each one vibrating with faint voices. I pressed my gloved hand against the surface. Beneath my palm, shapes flickered like film projections. Silhouettes of figures moving slowly, replaying gestures in endless loops. A man turning his head, a woman kneeling, a ranger lifting a radio. Their motion was too smooth, too human to dismiss as illusion. It struck me then, sound, pressure, memory, all could leave imprints. The glacier wasn't just ice. It was a recording medium sculpted by time itself. Every scream, every call, every story buried by snow might still live here, resonating in the deep. But the thought didn't comfort me. Because as I leaned closer, one of the shadows turned, and its mouth moved in sync with my breath. I stumbled back, the headset slipping off, yet the voice persisted, no longer confined to the speakers. It was around me, in me, finishing my words again. We remember, we remain. The sentence struck with the weight of prophecy. I ran until the fissure widened into light. Outside, the air tasted metallic, like ozone after lightning. Ellis's parka lay near the tent, the fabric crisp with frost. His radio crackled weakly, looping a single distorted line. "We are still here." My recorder blinked red, still active, but the waveform on its screen no longer followed the landscape's sounds. It traced my own heartbeat. That night I replayed the footage one last time before leaving. In the final seconds, just before the file cut to static, a second version of my voice emerged, clearer, closer, and slightly ahead, predicting each word I spoke by a fraction of a second. The echo had learned to lead. I deleted the recordings, but even as I drove away, the hum followed in my ears, faint, steady, impossibly familiar, like a pulse carved into silence. Some memories don't fade. They fossilize. The glacier didn't just mirror us. It archived us, keeping our voices suspended in the cold, waiting for the next listener to mistake echo for ghost. The fire wasn't supposed to burn that color. Campfires in the Zion wilderness always carry the same golden pulse, the living heart of the night. But that evening, when I struck the match, the flame rose cold and cobalt, shimmering like a gas leak in moonlight. Ellis laughed uneasily, calling it ionization from the desert air, yet even he fell quiet when the blue spread beyond the pit, licking across stones, bleeding up the trunks of nearby pines until the entire clearing glowed as if submerged underwater. The silence that followed wasn't natural. It was too complete, as though every sound had been swallowed by something vast and listening. We'd come to this canyon following reports from hikers, stories of unnatural fires that left no ash, no smoke, not even a scent. Skeptics blamed pranksters with chemicals, but when I crouched beside the flame, the heat felt wrong. It wasn't the searing sting of combustion. It was a dry metallic warmth, like standing near a transformer. I pressed my hand near the glow and felt no pain, just a vibration, a low hum threading up my bones. Somewhere deep inside it, faintly, there was rhythm. Ellis set up the spectrometer, his breath quick against the cold. The readings danced erratically, temperature spikes without source, light frequencies that didn't align with carbon burn signatures.
"Plasma anomalies?"
He guessed. but his voice carried doubt. He reminded me of an old superstition, that ghost lights were the breath of the earth escaping, souls of travelers who lost their way. The canyon walls caught the glow and returned it doubled, like reflections on opposing mirrors, turning the clearing into an electric cathedral. As the night deepened, shapes began to form within the fire, silhouettes that wavered but didn't distort like smoke. I blinked, convinced it was exhaustion, yet the shapes persisted, standing just beyond the blaze. The blue cast their features in silver lines, a hand, a face, a figure with shoulders bowed as if kneeling at the edge of something holy or broken. I felt the pull before I realized I'd moved closer. The hum swelled until my chest vibrated like a tuning fork. I whispered something, a test word, my own name, and the flame pulsed in response. Not once, but twice, as though it had learned my voice. Ellis muttered behind me, "It's reacting to sound waves." But we both knew what we heard wasn't reflection. It was response. When the wind rose, sparks lifted into the night, not orange, but white-blue embers drifting upward, defying gravity, hanging suspended like stars caught mid-fall. Then, just as suddenly, they began to descend again, slow and deliberate, aligning themselves in a near-perfect circle around us. My instinct screamed to step back, but my body refused. There was something hypnotic in the symmetry, like being chosen or measured. Then, all at once, the fire went silent, not out, not fading, just muted. The light remained, but the sound ceased entirely, and for one unbearable second, I realized my heartbeat no longer echoed in my ears. The hum had replaced it. The stillness stretched thin, a fabric about to tear. I leaned closer, breath frosting in the unnatural glow, and realized the blue wasn't just light. It was motion slowed to the edge of sight. The flames shimmered in two layers, one moving forward, one backward, like time looping over itself. Ellis circled the pit with his camera, the lens reflecting a ring of pale fire in his eyes. "It's electromagnetic," he whispered, but his voice faltered mid-sentence, smothered by the silence pressing on us like a weight. I'd heard of acoustic dead zones, places where sound waves cancel each other perfectly. But this wasn't cancellation. It was consumption. The air felt hungry. The hum returned, low and constant, vibrating the ground beneath our boots. I felt it crawling up my spine, threading into thought. The flame expanded outward again, blue giving way to white, until the clearing looked flooded by light from some unseen sun. Then, within the brightness, I saw shadows moving, faint silhouettes pacing the edge of the circle, featureless and tall. They were neither human nor spectral, but something in between, as though light itself was trying to remember what a body felt like. Ellis called my name, but I barely heard it. My focus locked on one shape among them, a figure crouched near the center, arm outstretched toward the fire. Its outline flickered like heat mirage, but I could see the gesture clearly. It was feeding the flame something invisible, and each motion made the blue flare brighter. When its head turned toward me, I saw no face, only a hollow, trembling light where eyes should have been. Instinct shoved me backward. My heel hit the ground hard enough to send a pulse through the dirt, and the fire answered with a surge of brightness that burned without warmth. Ellis shouted that his camera battery had died. All our electronics were draining in sync. The meters flatlined. The only thing still moving was the fire, burning cleaner, faster, erasing its own origin. I grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it over the flame. Nothing. The soil vanished before it touched the surface. The blue devoured it, absorbed it like it was fuel. Desperate, I stepped forward to smother it with the tarp. But the moment I crossed the ring of embers, my body felt weightless. The ground beneath me dissolved into sound. I wasn't falling. I was vibrating, my heartbeat aligning with the frequency of the hum. Then I heard it again, not from the air but from within my chest. The whisper that had once echoed Miller's name now shaped mine. The world snapped back. I was lying at the edge of the clearing, dawn bleeding gray over the horizon. The fire pit was cold, untouched, as though nothing had ever burned there. Ellis was gone. Only his camera remained, its lens cracked but still reflecting faint blue light. When I pressed play, the recording showed us around the campfire, but only one of us was moving. Some fires don't consume what's physical. They burned the boundaries between sound and self. The flame hadn't disappeared. It had moved inward, kindling somewhere behind my ribs, still humming. I first noticed the waiting silence for halfway through the trail. One moment the forest was alive, wings fluttering, branches creaking, and then like a switch thrown in some unseen control room, everything stopped. The stillness had weight. Even the wind seemed afraid to touch the trees. I checked my watch. 5:06 a.m., the same hour local rangers claimed the world goes quiet. They said birds vanish, sounds die, and something walks the paths meant only for echo. I laughed when I'd first heard it, another campfire myth to spice up patrol stories. But out there, surrounded by trees that stood like petrified sentinels, I couldn't find the laugh again. I set down my recording gear. The meters were flatlined, even though the microphone was live. Not even static, just a perfect, impossible zero. I clapped my hands and no echo. The sound left my palms but never returned, as if the air had forgotten how to carry noise. The air itself felt heavy, charged. When I exhaled, I could almost see the breath. A faint shimmer like heat on asphalt, then gone. That's when I saw the feathers. Hundreds of them scattered across the ground, spiraling outward in careful rings. No blood, no carcasses, just feathers arranged like symbols. They pointed toward the tree line, where the path bent toward the river. My boots sank slightly in the moss as I followed. The ground vibrated faintly, too soft to hear but deep enough to feel through the soles. A tremor synchronized with my heartbeat. I tried speaking into my recorder, but my voice came out thin, distant, like shouting underwater as I moved deeper. The air began to shimmer again, this time higher, forming what looked like a mirage, vertical waves, bending light between the trees. I raised the camera. The lens refused to focus, cycling endlessly, as if the scene itself was still deciding whether to exist. My chest felt tight, as though the silence pressed inward, flattening every sound except the rhythm of blood in my ears. Then, faintly, something else joined it, a pulse that wasn't mine. I turned, expecting an animal, but the forest was motionless. The silence grew deeper still, until it became a tone, low, bone deep, vibrating the fillings in my teeth. The branches overhead trembled without wind. I remembered reading about natural resonance frequencies, how bridges and buildings can be destroyed by vibration alone. But could a forest be tuned the same way? Could nature create its own frequency of fear? At the bend, the trail opened into a clearing drenched in mist. In the center, the feathers formed a perfect spiral. I stepped closer and the air hummed, a subtle oscillation that made my heart stutter in rhythm. My voice recorder clicked, unprompted, as if something had pressed record. The display flashed a single word before freezing. Listen. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the sound returned. Birds crying out all at once. A deafening explosion of wings. The forest exhaled, alive again. But when I glanced down, the spiral was gone. In its place, the moss was flattened, in the exact shape of a human body. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the outline in the moss. The forest, now awake, sounded wrong, too loud, too sudden, as if overcompensating for its own absence. The air buzzed with wings, but every note felt hollow, echoing in a space too vast for its source. My instincts told me to leave, yet the scientist in me stayed. I crouched to inspect the imprint, shallow, human-shaped, arms slightly outstretched. The moss beneath was compressed but not torn, as though something had lain there weightlessly, pressing down without mass. I set my equipment beside it. The audio recorder had stopped again, frozen mid-wave form. When I pressed play, the static came first, then that same infrasound hum I'd felt earlier. Low, rhythmic, beating once every second. But underneath, faint and almost mournful, came another sound, the flapping of wings. Except it wasn't outside. It was inside the recording itself, as if the silence had trapped the birds within its frequency. Then, between the pulses, a voice emerged, faint, genderless, but urgent. It said one word over and over, return. I looked up sharply. The birds circling above the canopy seemed to mirror the spiral I'd seen earlier, as though the pattern had simply risen into the air. Their movements were synchronized, unnervingly geometric. When they passed through a shaft of sunlight, I saw flashes of blue-gray shimmer on their wings, like the surface of a lake at night. Something about the rhythm of their flight drew me forward. My footsteps matched the hum beneath the soil until I found myself at the riverbank. The current was unnaturally still, a sheet of glass reflecting the canopy with perfect clarity. I leaned closer and felt the air temperature drop instantly. The surface trembled, and for a second I saw not my reflection, but the clearing viewed from above. The same spiral, the same body outline, and a second figure kneeling beside it. I stumbled back, breath fogging in the sudden cold. The recorder clicked on again, though I hadn't touched it. "Recording," the synthetic voice announced, followed by a brief pause. Then my own voice spoke from the speaker. "The silence is alive." My chest constricted. That wasn't from any previous log. I'd never said those words. The realization hit me like ice water. The recorder hadn't been capturing sound. It had been playing back what was coming next. The birds vanished mid-flight, swallowed by a soundless void that dropped like a curtain. The hum crescendoed, shaking the earth beneath me. For a moment I thought the river was boiling, but when I blinked, the water was gone. In its place was a hollow pit lined with wet feathers, spiraling downward into darkness. I don't remember leaving, only waking hours later by my truck, the forest unnaturally calm. The recorder sat on the dashboard, still blinking. I pressed play. This time the voice said only one word, over and over, my name. Some silences aren't absences at all. They are thresholds, frequencies between life and memory. The birds weren't escaping the forest. They were obeying it. And now, when dawn breaks, I sometimes wake to find a single feather at my door, pointing toward the trees. I first noticed the silence halfway through the trail. One moment the forest was alive, wings fluttering, branches creaking. And then, like a switch thrown in some unseen control room, everything stopped. The stillness had weight. Even the wind seemed afraid to touch the trees. I checked my watch. 5:06 a.m., the same hour local rangers claimed. The world goes quiet. They said birds vanish, sounds die, and something walks the paths meant only for echo. I laughed when I'd first heard it, another campfire myth to spice up patrol stories. But out there, surrounded by trees that stood like petrified sentinels, I couldn't find the laugh again. I set down my recording gear. The meters were flatlined, even though the microphone was live. Not even static, just a perfect, impossible zero. I clapped my hands and no echo. The sound left my palms but never returned, as if the air had forgotten how to carry noise. The air itself felt heavy, charged. When I exhaled, I could almost see the breath. A faint shimmer like heat on asphalt, then gone. That's when I saw the feathers. Hundreds of them scattered across the ground, spiraling outward in careful rings. No blood, no carcasses, just feathers arranged like symbols. They pointed toward the tree line, where the path bent toward the river. My boots sank slightly in the moss as I followed. The ground vibrated faintly, too soft to hear but deep enough to feel through the soles. A tremor synchronized with my heartbeat. I tried speaking into my recorder, but my voice came out thin, distant, like shouting underwater as I moved deeper. The air began to shimmer again, this time higher, forming what looked like a mirage, vertical waves, bending light between the trees. I raised the camera. The lens refused to focus, cycling endlessly, as if the scene itself was still deciding whether to exist. My chest felt tight, as though the silence pressed inward, flattening every sound except the rhythm of blood in my ears. Then, faintly, something else joined it, a pulse that wasn't mine. I turned, expecting an animal, but the forest was motionless. The silence grew deeper still, until it became a tone, low, bone deep, vibrating the fillings in my teeth. The branches overhead trembled without wind. I remembered reading about natural resonance frequencies, how bridges and buildings can be destroyed by vibration alone. But could a forest be tuned the same way? Could nature create its own frequency of fear? At the bend, the trail opened into a clearing drenched in mist. In the center, the feathers formed a perfect spiral. I stepped closer and the air hummed, a subtle oscillation that made my heart stutter in rhythm. My voice recorder clicked, unprompted, as if something had pressed record. The display flashed a single word before freezing. Listen. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the sound returned. Birds crying out all at once. A deafening explosion of wings. The forest exhaled, alive again. But when I glanced down, the spiral was gone. In its place, the moss was flattened, in the exact shape of a human. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear the echo of their return, a surge of wings like a sudden heartbeat from the sky. That morning, though, I couldn't shake the unease that something had changed between the forest and me. The silence hadn't broken. It had simply chosen to move. I knelt beside the human-shaped imprint. The moss was damp but warm, as if whatever had lain there still lingered beneath. My recorder, still frozen on the word listen, flickered once and rebooted on its own. The waveform was alive again, but the frequency was all wrong, oscillating between audible and infrasound, jumping erratically. I turned the volume up. There were voices. Not words exactly, but intonations, rising and falling like questions spoken by something that had only recently learned to mimic speech. I tried to trace the sound's source, rotating slowly with the microphone. Each time I turned north, the hum softened, but when I faced the spiral's center, the tone peaked. The forest around me blurred slightly, and for the briefest second, the trees appeared to breathe. Their trunks swelled as though air pulsed through them, roots exhaling steam from beneath the soil. Then the recorder snapped again, a pop of feedback so loud it knocked the headset off. I bent to pick it up, and noticed something that froze my spine. One of the feathers near the body shape was still moving, rolling uphill against gravity. I held my breath. Another followed, and another, all spiraling toward the same invisible axis until they hovered mid-air. The silence returned in a rush, swallowing the forest whole. Then came the whisper, soft, fragmented, like birdsong reversed. It circled me, impossible to pinpoint. Return. The same word I'd heard faintly before, only now it came from every direction. The feathers spun faster, forming a cyclone of pale light, and in that rotation I saw a pattern. Wings, hundreds of them, but not connected to any bodies. They beat soundlessly, their rhythm syncing with the pulse beneath the earth. Instinct broke through the awe. I bolted down the trail, branches whipping my arms, the hum chasing behind like distant thunder. The world blurred, color draining to monochrome. My body felt lighter, as though the silence itself was trying to lift me. Then all at once I stumbled through the tree line and into daylight. The forest's voice, wind, birds, life, came rushing back. When I reached my truck, I found the recorder already sitting on the driver's seat. I hadn't brought it out. Its red light blinked steadily, and when I pressed play, it emitted nothing but the low, rhythmic flutter of wings, not outside, but inside the sound, like a heartbeat rendered in flight. Then my voice emerged from the static. Calm, quiet, unfamiliar. Silence remembers us. Some places don't keep echoes. They cultivate them. The birds weren't fleeing the forest. They were part of its memory, returning each dawn to remind it how to breathe. And when I listen closely now, the quiet between their wings sounds almost human. When I woke that morning, the world felt hollow. The campsite was exactly as we'd left it the night before. Same ashes in the fire pit, same damp clothes hanging from the line, except my tent was gone. Not collapsed, not torn. Gone. The grass where it had stood was perfectly flattened, the shape of a rectangle pressed deep into the dew. My partner, Lena, had been inside. Her flashlight, her boots, her jacket, all missing too. I remember thinking how absurdly quiet it was, as though the forest hadn't realized it should make noise yet. I called out her name once. The sound fell flat, swallowed before it reached the trees. The forest was thick with morning fog, every trunk fading into pale infinity. My breath clouded the air, carrying the faint scent of burnt pine and damp soil. When I followed the outline of the missing tent, I noticed something strange. A perfect ring of disturbed moss circling the imprint, as though the ground itself had been twisted. I dropped to my knees, running my fingers through the dirt. It was warm. At first, I thought it might be an animal, bears maybe, or even poachers. But no tracks, no drag marks, nothing. Only the flattened grass and a few faint impressions leading downhill toward the ridge. My GPS was flickering, struggling to hold a signal. When I finally got coordinates, the device glitched. The map zoomed infinitely, showing my own position layered over itself again and again. The marker pulsed red like a heartbeat. I packed what I could carry and began descending the ridge. The forest changed quickly. The fog thickened until the trees blurred together like smudged charcoal lines. My compass needle spun without pause. Then I saw them. Faint orbs of light hovering through the mist, rising and sinking in rhythm. They weren't fireflies. They moved too precisely, mimicking the constellations overhead. When I looked up, the stars were mirrored perfectly by the floating lights below, as though the earth itself had become a reflection of the sky. The deeper I went, the more synchronized the lights became, until I realized one constellation, Orion, wasn't in the sky at all. It was forming right in front of me, each star anchored to a small mound of earth. My hands trembled as I traced the formation. It led toward a hollow grove, where the fog glowed faintly blue. There, suspended between two trees, was fabric, thin, weightless, like a curtain caught mid-breath. I stepped closer, and the fog seemed to retreat into it, pulled inward by something unseen. My flashlight flickered once, then went dead. The fabric shifted in the dark, solidifying. It was my tent, standing exactly as before, zipped, motionless. But the ground beneath it wasn't solid. It rippled like the surface of a lake. I whispered Lena's name again. From inside, something shifted, slow, deliberate. The zipper began to open from within. The zipper sound was slow, almost tender, that faint rasp of metal teeth unthreading one by one. I stood frozen, my breath hanging pale in the fog. The tent sagged slightly as if inhaling. When the flap fell open, nothing emerged, but the air that poured out was warm and dry, like exhalation from a deep cavern. My flashlight flickered back to life for one blink. Inside was darkness, not the kind born of shadow, but something heavier, as if the light itself refused to enter. Lena? The word sounded thinner than I meant it to. No echo returned. I reached forward, fingertips grazing the fabric. It vibrated, not from wind, but from some subtle inner motion, like a heartbeat trapped inside canvas. The instant my skin met the surface, the ground beneath me pulsed. Moss rippled outward in concentric circles, and my hand vanished up to the wrist. There was no resistance, no pain, just the sensation of dipping into cold water. Then I heard her voice. It wasn't calling from inside the tent. It was all around me, above me, behind me, whispering my name in loops. I tried pulling back, but the fabric clung like surface tension, stretching between us. The fog outside had stopped moving entirely. Even the trees seemed to lean inward, watching. My heart raced in sync with the rhythmic vibration beneath my feet. And then, for a fraction of a second, I saw her face inside. Translucent, calm, eyes open but unfocused, as though she was looking through me rather than at me. The sight snapped something in me. I tore my arm free and stumbled backward. The tent shuddered violently, collapsing inward as if sucked through itself. The blue light winked out. I fell hard, landing on damp leaves, gasping in the sudden dark. When my eyes adjusted, the clearing was empty again. No tent, no trace, just a faint burn mark in the moss the size of a camp mat. My radio crackled weakly, the first sound I'd heard in hours. A faint signal. I raised it to my ear and froze. Static filled the channel, broken occasionally by a soft breathing pattern that matched my own. Then in between, a distorted voice whispered, "Stay where you are." It was Lena's tone, but drawn out, mechanized, like a recording played backward. By the time I returned to base, my GPS still glitched, showing multiple red dots, my coordinates looping in a circle, all converging on the same spot, the ridge where I'd found the tent. The local ranger didn't believe a word, but when we hiked back the next morning, the moss was scorched in 3 perfect rings, like the imprints of something landing. I kept her flashlight. Sometimes it flickers on by itself around dawn, casting pale light in the direction of that ridge. When I check the reflection in the lens, I sometimes see 2 silhouettes, mine and another standing slightly behind me, watching the trees. Some disappearances don't erase people, they rearrange them. The forest hadn't taken Lena, it had mirrored her. And now, when fog gathers before sunrise, I can still hear her zipper moving, as though the tent never left, only shifted into another version before sunrise, when the water was still dark enough to confuse reflection with depth. Locals said the lake films things differently, that if you wave, the reflection lags behind, like an echo with light instead of sound. Most people laughed it off as fog or optical illusion, But a ranger's report claimed he'd seen his reflection smile back while his face was still. And that was the last thing he wrote before his boat drifted in empty, motor still running. I came to see if the lake really remembered what it saw. The surface was glass. Not a ripple, not a sound except the slow pull of wind across cedar. I set up my camera at the dock, facing the water. My reflection formed crisp and perfect. Same hat, same dark coat, except the eyes seemed off. They caught light differently, as if filmed through a different lens. I lifted my hand, and in the reflection, the gesture lagged half a heartbeat behind. A tiny delay, almost imperceptible, yet it was enough to make my stomach drop. I checked the footage. No glitch, no frame loss. The reflection simply chose to move later. I leaned closer to the edge, studying the water. The color deepened from blue to something darker, almost metallic like ink stirred under glass. My pulse began to sync with the faint ripples I hadn't noticed before. Concentric, perfect. Radiating outward from my reflection's chest instead of mine. When the first distortion hit, it came not as sight but sound, a low hum just beneath hearing, like infrasound pulsing from below the lake bed. My eardrums tingled and the air around me thickened, making every breath feel submerged. The reflection blinked. I didn't. My muscles froze mid-inhale while the image in the lake moved freely, scanning me. The sensation wasn't like being watched. It was like being measured. I stumbled back, camera still rolling. The feed crackled, frame rate dropping as static bled through the image. The reflection, my reflection, stepped backward in sync with me, then stopped abruptly. For the first time, it didn't mirror. Its head tilted slightly to one side, curious. The same expression I'd seen on surveillance animals when they recognized themselves for the first time. Wind lifted across the lake, scattering the image into fragments. When the surface settled, the reflection had returned to normal, perfectly aligned again. I almost convinced myself it was fatigue, illusion, a trick of optics. But when I replayed the footage, there was a single skipped frame. In it, the reflection was smiling. The smile wasn't wide or monstrous. It was subtle, human, patient. The kind that said, "I'm learning." The kind that said, "You looked first." I turned off the camera. But even with my eyes closed, I could feel the lake still gazing upward, waiting for me to move again. That night I camped near the shore. The lake was a dark mirror, perfectly still, reflecting the pale sweep of clouds like veins under glass. I kept the camera aimed at the water, recording continuously, though the lens often fogged as if breathing in sync with something invisible. Around midnight, a ripple began spreading across the surface, not from wind or wildlife, but from the reflection itself, as though the image were stirring while the water slept. When I reviewed the live feed on my laptop, the footage displayed a faint double exposure, two versions of me layered seconds apart. The reflection leaned closer to the lens while I sat motionless by the fire. I blinked once. On screen, the reflection didn't. Its face remained fixed, eyes locked on the camera, lips moving slowly. I turned the volume up, faint static, then my own voice whispering words I hadn't said. "It's colder down here." The hum returned, deeper now, vibrating through the ground like the lake itself had grown lungs. My tent poles trembled. The air pressed inward until the sound felt physical. I grabbed my flashlight and stumbled toward the dock. The beam stretched far across the water, then fractured, reflecting two lights where only one should have been. For a heartbeat, I saw myself standing out there, ankle deep in the lake, flashlight steady, expression blank. I shouted, and the sound scattered like gravel on ice. The other me didn't move. Then, in eerie synchronization, he lifted his flashlight and pointed it back at me. Its beam found my eyes instantly, blinding. I fell to my knees, covering my face, but when I lowered my hands, the light was gone. The dock was empty again. The reflection still shimmered faintly, calm, unbroken. I backed away, pulse hammering. Behind me, the camera clicked off by itself. When I reached the tent, the laptop screen was still glowing. The live feed displayed the lake under moonlight, except now, my reflection wasn't sitting on the dock. It was standing directly behind me. My breath hitched. I turned around so fast I lost balance, but no one was there. Only the faint scent of water where the air should have been dry. At dawn, I left the camp in silence. I didn't look back, but I could feel it. That subtle pull between two mirrors. the way a shadow feels aware of its source. Days later, while reviewing the footage one last time, I noticed something hidden between frames. A figure surfacing behind my reflection. It had my outline, my clothing, even the small scar on my jaw, but its eyes were open wider than mine had ever been, staring upward, not at me, but through me. I used to think mirrors captured who we are. Now I know they record who we're becoming. The lake didn't reflect my face. It remembered it, storing every gesture, every blink, every unfinished version of myself waiting just beneath the surface. Rehearsing, patient, ready for the next time I lean close enough to meet its gaze. It began with a red X, an inked cross buried in the margins of an old park survey map from 1979. Faded paper, smudged notes, the kind of artifact usually dismissed as cartographic noise. But this one was labeled in firm black pencil, "Do not approach." No coordinates, no legend, just that warning, sitting at the edge of Yellowstone's uncharted backcountry. My work digitizing the archives should have ended there. Instead, I entered the X manually into the GPS system. The device blinked once, processing, then froze. A message appeared across the screen. "You are already there." At first, I assumed a malfunction. Maybe corrupted geodata, bad satellite sync, but the coordinates weren't random. They matched my current location, exactly down to the meter, inside my office, miles away from the park. Something in me couldn't let it go. I cross-referenced older ranger logs, weather reports, geological surveys, all blank near that region. No records, no assigned stations, as if the land itself had been redacted. The next morning I drove out. The forest road narrowed until the map became useless. My GPS flickered between readings, struggling to decide where I was. Each time the coordinates stabilized, they pointed to slightly different spots. A circle maybe 50 yards wide, shifting like a living compass. I stopped the car at the center of the drift zone. The air felt dense, faintly charged, like before a storm. There was no signpost, no trailhead, only roots and brush tangled over old foundations. Half buried in soil, I found the remnants of concrete steps leading down into darkness. The wind carried a faint mechanical hum, not wind, not water, something deeper, pulsing in steady intervals. I descended carefully, light cutting through layers of dust. The structure below was a bunker, cracked walls, rusted hinges, old wiring still snaking through the ceiling like veins. In the far corner, I found a desk with an unplugged computer, coated in sediment. A yellowed note was taped to the monitor. "If it turns on, leave it on." My stomach tightened. The machine hummed to life the instant I touched the keyboard. A single window blinked open. The screen displayed lines of coordinates scrolling endlessly, updating every second. At first, I thought it was tracking something moving. Then I realized each new entry repeated my exact location, latitude, longitude, altitude, as if logging me in real time. The coordinates began to shift faster. Every few seconds, the numbers rearranged, jumping just slightly north, slightly west, like reality misplacing itself by inches. A low tone vibrated through the bunker, echoing off concrete. I pulled away from the desk, heart pounding, but the monitor's glow intensified until the room looked submerged in blue light. Then the message appeared, superimposed over the numbers, "Do not approach. You are already inside." The hum rose to a throbbing pitch, and the lights flickered out. For a moment, everything went dark, except the screen, still glowing faintly in the reflection. The coordinates had stopped updating. The screen froze on a single set of numbers, mine. I typed in a command to trace their location, but before the search completed, the monitor flickered and displayed something else. Log entry 001, site reactivated. Then, beneath it, a line began to write itself. Observer present. The hum beneath the floor deepened. Dust cascaded from the ceiling like falling ash. I backed toward the stairs, but the concrete steps behind me now descended farther than they should have, each one multiplying like a mirror reflecting into darkness. I climbed upward, yet the surface didn't appear. My flashlight began to stutter in rhythm with the low tone, its beam pulsing like a heartbeat. I stopped moving. Every flicker of light revealed the same wall, the same desk, the same monitor waiting patiently for acknowledgement. The keyboard clicked once. Not from me. A new window opened, a satellite image of the area. My position marked by the same red X. The map zoomed in on its own, pixels sharpening, until the frame showed something impossible, the bunker from above. Yet inside it, a faint heat signature shaped like a person sitting at the desk. It was me staring upward into the camera. I killed the power. The screen went black, but the reflection on the glass remained. Not my face, but a darker outline sitting where I'd been moments ago. It lifted its head slowly. The hum quieted, replaced by a low clicking sound, mechanical but rhythmic, like a countdown muffled by distance. I turned to run, but the doorway had collapsed inward, blocked by concrete and dirt. Panic sharpened everything. My pulse synced with the faint vibrations underfoot, each throb rising like pressure before an earthquake. I yanked at the debris until the ceiling cracked overhead, letting in a sliver of light. That was when I saw it. Faint writing etched into the inner wall near the exit, carved deep by something metallic. Every coordinate leads here. The hum crescendoed, blurring thought into instinct. I pushed through the rubble and emerged, gasping into the daylight. The forest above had changed. The trees stood wider apart, air colder. The horizon tilted slightly as if the world had shifted a few degrees. My GPS blinked erratically on the ground. The display was blank except for a single phrase flashing over the coordinates. New origin set. The numbers matched my location again. Not just the forest, not just the region. The exact spot where I was standing. I drove until signal returned. But every map I opened recentered itself the same way, zooming endlessly until the red marker filled the screen, coordinates looping in on themselves like a spiral. My phone's compass spun even when the car wasn't moving. Some places aren't found on maps because they are the maps, self-updating, self-observing, folding every traveler into their geometry. I didn't discover the coordinates. I completed them. Now wherever I go, my GPS never stops. It just keeps whispering, "You are already there." Snow fell in perfect silence, each flake too heavy to sparkle. My team and I had been tracking a missing climber across Banff's frozen ridges for 2 days, and exhaustion had blurred everything. Time, distance, even memory. But what we found that morning reset every thought. A single line of footprints appeared ahead of us on untouched snow. Human, barefoot, perfectly defined. They trailed toward the northern slope, cutting across ice like a deliberate invitation. At first, we assumed they belonged to the missing hiker, delirious from cold, maybe shedding gear in panic. But the prints were fresh, sharp-edged, not softened by wind or drift. When I measured the stride, it didn't match human gait. Too long, too balanced, as if the walker floated rather than pressed down. I placed my boot beside one and felt warmth radiating faintly from within the impression. The snow hadn't melted. It vibrated, the crystals quivering at the edges. Ellis raised the thermal scanner. The screen lit up faintly orange, residual heat signatures suspended mid-air, several inches above each footprint. "Thermal echo," he muttered, though even he didn't believe it. The air shimmered faintly, like heat distortion on a highway. I looked ahead. The trail continued, but every fifth print simply stopped. Not erased, not blown away, just absent, skipping forward in impossible leaps. We followed in uneasy silence. My breathing felt too loud in the frozen air, fogging my visor. Each exhale seemed to hang too long, reluctant to dissipate. When I looked back, my own tracks seemed shallower, fainter than they should have been. It was as if the snow was slowly deciding to forget me. By noon, the wind shifted, carrying a sound that didn't belong, not whistling, not groaning. Something between a sigh and a hum, rhythmic as heartbeat. The source wasn't ahead or behind, but all around, vibrating through the ground. My radio crackled, then cut out. Static bled into the hum, shaping faint words I could almost recognize. Keep walking. We reached a clearing at dusk, an expanse of untouched snow surrounded by jagged peaks. The footprints ended at its center, the final one half-formed, toes fading mid-step, like the walker had evaporated mid-motion. I crouched beside it, placing my glove just above the mark. The heat signature remained steady, neither cooling nor dispersing. Time itself seemed paused there. Ellis circled the area, snapping photos. "It's like they're walking out of phase," he said quietly. The phrase unsettled me, out of phase, as if these weren't just missing hikers but missing moments, people slipping between slices of reality thin as frost. The wind died completely. For an instant all was still. Then faintly I heard it. Footsteps behind us, slow, steady, matching ours in delay, as though the snow were replaying our movements seconds late. We turned. There were no new prints, only ours, but half of them were fading, the snow smoothing itself, erasing us one step at a time. We moved fast after that, though every direction felt wrong. The snow swallowed distance, horizon bleeding into cloud until up and down blurred. I kept glancing back, counting our footprints like lifelines, but they were vanishing even as I watched, collapsing into smooth white. Ellis muttered numbers under his breath, measuring steps, trying to impose logic on the impossible. It didn't help. The air pulsed with a low resonance that made thought feel viscous, like swimming through sound. At one point, I stopped, desperate to listen. The hum had shifted, almost melodic now, 3 low notes repeating in a steady cycle. It was hypnotic, mechanical, precise, the same pattern I'd seen earlier on the thermal scanner. A rhythm so constant it felt engineered. I realized then that the sound wasn't in the air. It was beneath it. The ground itself was transmitting something as if the mountain had a pulse. We found a ridge with a steep drop-off. Below, an icy plain shimmered faintly with heat distortions, rising and falling in perfect symmetry. The pattern mirrored a waveform, valleys and peaks glowing under the surface. "It's like the mountains broadcasting," Ellis whispered. His words steamed in the cold, hanging motionless before dissipating. He stepped forward, lowering the scanner to record a reading. Then he froze. The ground beneath his boots softened. I saw his print begin to sink, not collapse, not melt. Sink, like it was falling into itself. He leapt back and the impression sealed shut instantly, leaving the snow perfectly untouched. I dropped to my knees, digging at it with gloved hands. The layer beneath was solid, no cavity, no tunnel. It was as if the snow had chosen to forget him too. We turned to retreat, but the trail behind us was gone. Nothing remained. No footprints, no path, just an unbroken white field stretching endlessly in every direction. Panic took me then, raw and unscientific. The sky darkened unnaturally fast, and a faint luminescence began to rise from the snow, the same pale orange as the thermal readings. For one fleeting moment, I saw hundreds of footprints materializing all at once, faint, glowing, overlapping. Some small, some huge, some moving in directions that defied gravity. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they vanished. The hum peaked, vibrating through my chest until I couldn't breathe. The scanner in Ellis's hand shattered, screen fracturing from the inside. I shouted, but no sound came out. My words existed only in thought. My final clear image of him was his face lit by that strange glow, staring at me with understanding rather than fear. The silent recognition that we were witnessing something alive, something ancient, rewriting space beneath our feet. When I came to, the world had changed temperature. I was alone, lying beside a single footprint, mine, frozen solid, edges gleaming like glass. My radio crackled faintly with static that sounded eerily like breathing. I whispered Ellis's name, but the static only repeated mine. Some disappearances aren't about distance, they're about memory. The mountain doesn't keep what crosses it. It absorbs it, compressing time until even footprints become echoes of motion. I still dream of that hum sometimes, and when I wake, the snow outside my cabin always looks freshly smoothed, as if something has walked there and chosen not to silence each flake too heavy to sparkle. My team and I had been tracking a missing climber across Banff's frozen ridges for 2 days, and exhaustion had blurred everything. Time, distance, even memory. But what we found that morning reset every thought. A single line of footprints appeared ahead of us on untouched snow, human, barefoot, perfectly defined. They trailed toward the northern slope, cutting across ice like a deliberate invitation. At first we assumed they belonged to the missing hiker, delirious from cold, maybe shedding gear in panic. But the prints were fresh, sharp-edged, not softened by wind or drift. When I measured the stride, it didn't match human gait, too long, too balanced, as if the walker floated rather than pressed down. I placed my boot beside one and felt warmth radiating faintly from within the impression. The snow hadn't melted. It vibrated, the crystals quivering at the edges. Ellis raised the thermal scanner. The screen lit up faintly orange, residual heat signatures suspended midair, several inches above each footprint. "Thermal echo?" he muttered, though even he didn't believe it. The air shimmered faintly, like heat distortion on a highway. I looked ahead. The trail continued, but every fifth print simply stopped, not erased, not blown away, just absent, skipping forward in impossible leaps. We followed in uneasy silence. My breathing felt too loud in the frozen air, fogging my visor. Each exhale seemed to hang too long, reluctant to dissipate. When I looked back, my own tracks seemed shallower, fainter than they should have been. It was as if the snow was slowly deciding to forget me. By noon, the wind shifted, carrying a sound that didn't belong, not whistling, not groaning, something between a sigh and a hum, rhythmic as heartbeat. The source wasn't ahead or behind, but all around, vibrating through the ground. My radio crackled, then cut out. Static bled into the hum, shaping faint words I could almost recognize. "Keep walking." We reached a clearing at dusk, an expanse of untouched snow surrounded by jagged peaks. The footprints ended at its center, the final one half-formed, toes fading mid-step like the walker had evaporated mid-motion. I crouched beside it, placing my glove just above the mark. The heat signature remained steady, neither cooling nor dispersing. Time itself seemed paused there. Ellis circled the area, snapping photos. "It's like they're walking out of phase," he said quietly. The phrase unsettled me. Out of phase. As if these weren't just missing hikers, but missing moments. People slipping between slices of reality, thin as frost. The wind died completely. For an instant, all was still. Then faintly I heard it. Footsteps behind us, slow, steady, matching ours in delay, as though the snow were replaying our movements seconds late. We turned. There were no new prints, only ours, but half of them were fading, the snow smoothing itself, erasing us one step at a time. The world narrowed to white and pulse. Every sound collapsed inward, wind, breath, even thought, until all that existed was the soft thud of my boots and the answering echo that wasn't quite an echo. The footsteps followed us perfectly, but not in real time. Each one landed half a heartbeat late, as though the mountain were recording our path and playing it back. I turned in a panic, expecting movement. There was nothing, only the shimmering blur of snow swallowing itself. Ellis tried to keep us oriented with the compass, but the needle spun wildly, drawn to something beneath us. He muttered equations, clinging to reason, seismic feedback, magnetic interference, optical illusion, anything to name it. But when the hum beneath the ground returned softer this time, I saw his rationality begin to unravel. The snow around his boots trembled, forming faint indentations beside his. Smaller, barefoot, walking in parallel. We both stepped back. The new prints appeared ahead of us, one by one, carving their path into existence. There was no visible source, no figure, no weight, just snow folding under invisible pressure. My breath caught. The prints led forward into fog, stopping a few yards ahead, then vanished mid-stride. The hum deepened, carrying a rhythm that resonated inside my skull. I realized with a cold certainty it wasn't random. It was mimicking our heartbeats. I called out to break the spell, but my voice came back delayed, repeating in my own tone, fractured, stretched. "Hello?" the echo said, half a second behind me. Then again, then in reverse. I dropped to my knees, pressing an ear to the ice. Beneath the solid crust came a faint rhythmic thud, 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 like footsteps trapped under glass. Ellis shouted my name. I looked up just in time to see him reach toward something in the air. For a heartbeat he shimmered, his outline flickering as if refracted through water. Then he was gone. No collapse, no sound, just gone. His footprints ended mid-motion, toes sinking half an inch before smoothing over. I ran to the spot, clawing at the snow until my fingers burned. The ice beneath was warm. "Ellis!" My voice tore out of me, but the mountain gave no reply. Only a faint crunch behind me, perfectly timed to my shout. I turned. A single set of footprints trailed toward me across the clearing, barefoot, familiar, stopping inches from where I stood. My own breath fogged and dissolved. Then came the whisper, faint and close, vibrating the air itself. "Keep walking." I ran until my lungs gave out, until the snow became sky and horizon lost meaning. When I collapsed, everything was silent again. Too silent. My own track stretched behind me for a few yards, then ended abruptly. Not every disappearance happens in space. Some occur in sequence. The footprints weren't left by those ahead of us. They were left by us, walking a few seconds out of sync with ourselves. The mountain wasn't swallowing people. It was rearranging time, one step at a time, until nothing remained but the echo of our last direction, forward. The old visitor center at Denali was a skeleton of its former self, roof sagging, windows blind with dust, the air thick with the scent of cold metal and cedar rot. I came to catalog artifacts before the building was demolished. Maps, placards, weathered displays that had taught tourists about glaciers and wolves. But what drew me wasn't on the inventory list. It stood alone in the center of the main hall, a glass case, human-sized, its surface dark as frozen water. A ranger decades ago had marked it for removal after claiming it reflected futures instead of faces. The note made me smile. It didn't by the end of the night. The first thing I noticed was how the glass swallowed light. My flashlight beam entered but never returned. It was a perfect mirror only when something moved. Only then did it respond, faintly delayed, as though thought had to travel before image. I lifted my hand, and the reflection lingered, fingers still raised after mine fell. I thought of persistence in retinal afterimages or latency in digital sensors. But this was older, analog, elemental. I stepped closer until breath fogged the surface. Beneath the mist, another version of my face waited, subtly wrong. The jaw a little leaner, the hair grayer, eyes hollowed by years that hadn't yet come. I laughed nervously and waved again. The reflection smiled late, just enough to make my skin crawl. Then the smile stayed. The hall creaked as wind pushed through the broken rafters. I turned briefly. The mirror darkened completely as if startled. When I looked back, a faint glow rippled through the glass, illuminating shapes beneath the surface. Outlines of people, layered like trapped reflections from every person who had ever stood before it. Hundreds, maybe thousands, stacked like transparencies. I raised the camera to document the anomaly, but the lens refused to focus. The autofocus hunted endlessly, locking on something behind me. I turned, flashlight cutting through the gloom. Nothing. The click of the shutter still went off, its flash bouncing from the glass. For an instant, the reflection of the hall looked reversed, furniture on the wrong side, light bending in the opposite direction. Then I noticed my reflection hadn't taken the photo. It still stood there, camera lowered, watching me. I lowered mine slowly. The figure inside the glass did the same. A heartbeat late. But when I stepped sideways, it didn't follow. It stayed perfectly still, eyes tracking me while the body remained frozen. My chest tightened, each breath short and deliberate. I whispered, "What are you?" And the reflection opened its mouth in response. But no sound came out, only a thin crack running down the mirror's center. Like a fracture between moments, a faint sound rose from within, like the turning of film through an old projector. Images flickered deep in the surface, lightning, fire, a face pressed close to glass. My own, older, eyes wide, whispering, "Don't stay past dusk." The light outside dimmed fast, draining the hall of color until everything looked submerged in blue. The mirror glowed faintly on its own now, soft light emanating from beneath its surface like bioluminescence. I should have left then. The air had that electric stillness of an oncoming storm, pressure building in invisible waves. But curiosity can be cruel when it hides behind reason. I told myself I was documenting, that every strange phenomenon deserved evidence. Deep down, I just wanted to see what came next. I placed a small sensor at the base of the frame. The reading spiked instantly, magnetic fluctuations pulsing in precise rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. My reflection stood still, perfectly obedient, while the world around it shimmered as though seen through heat. Then slowly, it tilted its head. Not much. Just enough to show intention, I whispered again, barely audible. "What are you?" The reflection didn't answer in words. Instead, its mouth moved slightly out of sync, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then it raised its hand and pressed it against the glass. A dark bloom spread outward from the point of contact, not on my side, but within. I leaned closer until my breath fogged the same spot. The fog cleared to reveal something else behind the glass. Not reflection, not space, depth. An entire room stretched within the mirror, an inverted replica of the hall, dimly lit, fractured by faint embers floating in the air. And in that mirrored room stood me. The same coat, the same posture, only older, hair peppered gray, eyes bruised with exhaustion. He, or it, looked directly at me and mouthed the words I'd seen earlier. "Don't stay past dusk." The air snapped cold. My flashlight flickered out. Across the hall, the emergency exit sign dimmed, its red letters bleeding into darkness. The reflection's glow grew stronger, turning the glass into a window of pure light. Within it, the older version of me stepped backward, vanishing into shadow. And something else stepped forward, taller, wrongly proportioned. Its arms hung too long, fingers brushing the frame from the inside. A sharp crack echoed, the mirror's surface splintering, not shattering but peeling, layers sliding apart like sheets of ice. The humming returned, low and resonant, vibrating through my teeth. My reflection, the first one, the real one, began to fade. I could see straight through its chest to the mirrored hall behind it. For a heartbeat, I thought the glass might consume me too, fold me neatly into its chronology of watchers. I staggered back, tripping over the sensor. The impact broke my line of sight, and in that instant the glow died. The mirror turned black, inert, reflecting only what it should, my trembling self, lit by a dying flashlight. When I stepped outside, the sky had already gone completely dark. Behind me, lightning flickered soundlessly across the clouds. For the briefest second, I saw the visitor center's window catch the light, one pane still glowing faintly from within. Someone or something was standing behind it, watching the forest. Some reflections don't mimic, they remember. The glass hadn't shown my future or my past. It had offered a replacement. And now, when I see my reflection in ordinary mirrors, there's a half-second delay, long enough for me to wonder if I made it out, or if I'm just the one still waiting on the other side. The forest had a sound to it, not rustling or wind, but something quieter, buried beneath hearing. A low, constant murmur like a river whispering through roots. I first noticed it while logging field recordings for a study on infrasound, those subsonic frequencies that shape the way we feel a place more than we ever hear it. National Park disappearances, the legend said, all shared this frequency. I didn't believe in legends, but standing there beneath the black fur canopy, I felt it vibrating in my ribs. The forest was humming. The last ranger I'd interviewed told me something strange before I came. "It remembers," he said. "It learns your name. That's why some don't come back." I laughed because it sounded poetic, the way grief often does when we pretend it's science. But when I set up the sound recorder and said my name aloud for calibration, the forest seemed to answer. The trees shifted. The hum deepened by a single note, as if the system had accepted a password. For the first hour, everything felt normal. Data streamed clean, wind steady, temperature dropping with dusk. Then came the first anomaly. Faint voices threaded through the low frequencies. I filtered them through the analyzer. Harmonic distortions between 17 and 19 hertz, the range that induces fear, nausea, and hallucination. Yet these weren't artifacts. The cadence matched human speech, multiple speakers whispering beneath the noise floor. I leaned close to the microphone, heartbeat loud in my ears. The whispers modulated, forming syllables like the forest was learning to pronounce something. The waveform on the screen began to stabilize into rhythmic pulses. Short, long, short, long. Morse code patterns forming words. I froze when I recognized them. Names, at first random, disconnected fragments. Then familiar. Names from missing persons reports across decades, rangers, campers, climbers, some I had read earlier that week, some I didn't know. And then my own. It spoke it perfectly. My name rolled through the air like wind moving through hollow wood. The forest shifted again, canopy creaking in unison. My breath fogged, not from cold but from awe. Every sound, every vibration seemed drawn toward me. I shut off the recorder, but the whispers continued, carried by the trees themselves. Voices looping in overlapping layers, as though the woods were replaying everything it had ever heard. I backed away, disoriented. My name came again, louder, now fractured by echoes. Somewhere deeper in the trees, a single light blinked, faint, pulsing in rhythm with the sound. I thought it was another researcher, maybe a ranger. But when I called out, the voice that answered wasn't human. It said, "Don't forget." Then the light flickered once and went out. Night in that valley didn't arrive like sunset. It descended layer by layer until even the concept of sky vanished. My flashlight beam dissolved after a few feet, swallowed by particles of mist too dense to be air. The forest's hum deepened until it became vibration more than sound, felt through skin, bone, the space behind my eyes. Every few seconds a voice flickered through it, sometimes distant, sometimes right beside me. I tried speaking to it, first softly, then louder, asking questions no one should ever ask a wilderness. "Who are you? What do you want?" The replies were inconsistent, fractured by interference, but one phrase repeated with mathematical precision. "We remember." The ground shifted underfoot, soft like peat. My boots sank into a pattern of shallow depressions, dozens of them arranged in a spiral. They weren't random. Each print had depth variations that formed rhythm, sound encoded in shape. I realized, horrified, that the soil was a phonograph, memory recorded through pressure. Every footprint was a syllable. Every disappearance, a word the forest had been writing over time. I knelt, pressing my ear to the dirt. The vibrations grew stronger, layering until I could make out sentences, overlapping, whispering, begging. "Still here." It hurt us. "Keep listening." The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds, frost crawling up the bark like handwriting across pages. My own breath joined the cloud rising from the earth, merging with it, as though the forest were exhaling through me. I stumbled backward, tripping over a fallen log. My recorder, still hanging from my shoulder, switched on without command. Static filled the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of my own voice from earlier, echoing back. "My name is..." The tape cut before finishing. Then another voice took over, completing it perfectly. "My name," spoken in the same tone, but not my mouth. The forest was reciting me. A shimmer rippled through the mist, resolving into vague human shapes between the trees, outlines stitched together from light and shadow. Each one moved like breath, expanding, contracting, their forms dissolving when I blinked. Some were walking. Some stood still, heads tilted upward as if listening to a sky that wasn't there. And through them, I saw the trees themselves bending, trunks twisting subtly to face me. The whisper rose in pitch until it became one sound, vast and singular, speaking not in language but in feeling. "Stay." The world swayed. My knees hit the ground. I felt the forest move through me, every vibration threading into the rhythm of my pulse. The last thing I heard before everything dimmed was my own heartbeat syncing with the hum, indistinguishable from it. When dawn came, I was standing at the edge of the valley, miles from where I'd last remembered being. My recorder was silent except for a single message burned into the waveform. New name remembered. The forest doesn't steal people. It archives them, translating breath and heartbeat into language, syllables pressed into root and soil. It never forgets the ones who spoke. And sometimes when the wind passes through hollow trees at dusk, it says my name. Perfectly. Subscribe. If you dare.